Here's a partial list of the ingredients in seminal fluid. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list, but this is a list of some of the chemicals and cells and other immune chemicals that are found in seminal fluid in relatively high concentrations. Now, again, my conjecture throughout this video series on NoFap is that there is a benefit to reducing the amount, the number of times that we ejaculate, in the fact that this conjecture of mine is a claim that we reabsorb the seminal fluid when we don't use it over time. Not only that, all the chemicals on the board here, every time that we release them, we have to remake them. And some of these, as you can see, are minerals and vitamins like vitamin C. So these are essential elements that we have to get from our diet. So every time we go out and, we have sex or we masturbate, we have to remake this stuff. And again, my conjecture throughout this video series is that we have the capacity to reabsorb seminal fluid. That's been proven. And some of these chemicals can actually migrate to the brain and improve consciousness. Okay, so all my references will be in the description box below. Let's just rip through this here. So on the top, I'm going to go with the cells. These are the cells I found in seminal fluid. Sperm, obviously, there are 600 million sperm cells per 4 milliliters of seminal fluid. There's also epithelial cells, myeloid cells, immune cells, and endocrine cells. So again, these are all in seminal fluid. It's not just semen and water here, or sperm and water. There's a lot of other things in seminal fluid. Now for the chemicals, we have choline, which is a precursor for acetylcholine, which is one of the most abundant neurotransmitters in the body. We have sialic acid, which helps brain plasticity. It also aids in immune function, especially against the virus influenza. We have inositol 8, which is a pseudovitamin that has multiple functions throughout the body. Spermine is another chemical, which may actually be a protein. I'm not exactly sure. I'll have to look it up. But anyway, spermine is found in seminal fluid, and that helps compact DNA. Pyruvate is used for energy. Creatine is also used for energy. Ascorbic acid is an antioxidant. Vitamin, known as vitamin C, this is ascorbic acid, is an antioxidant. Catalase is an antioxidant that requires iron, I believe. Superoxide dismutase. Now that is like the most efficient antioxidant we have in the body. So this is also found in seminal fluid in relatively high concentrations. These are all found in relatively high concentrations. Fructose, glucose are both used for energy creation. Citrate is a powerful buffering molecule. And then again, we have these metals and minerals here. We have iron, magnesium, potassium, sodium, zinc, calcium. Now, these are all minerals that we can't make, so we have to get them from the environment. So every time that we release the seminal fluid, we have to replenish it. Okay, finally, we have a relatively large amount of lipid bodies in seminal fluid, and these lipid bodies are used to make cell membranes. Now, seminal fluid is also rich in protein, and a third of the protein found in seminal fluid is actually albumin. Albumin makes up a third of all protein in seminal fluid, and albumin is synthesized in the liver, and it has the capacity to carry fat-soluble chemicals through the blood system for us, because the blood is water-soluble. So albumin is critical for carrying hormones, metals, fatty acids, and fats through the body for us. So this is a critical protein for proper function. And anyways, there's a third of all the protein in seminal fluid is, again, albumin. Okay, so we also have a lot of immune chemicals. We also have, immune cells in the body. So we're also going to get seminal fluid. We're also going to get a lot of immune chemicals in seminal fluid as well. And I'll go over in another video one of the reasons why that is. Now, one of the most abundant immune chemicals is something called prostaglandin E2. Now, prostaglandin is kind of an immune chemical, kind of a hormone. Not a lot of mammals actually synthesize their own prostaglandins. Humans are one of the few animals that synthesize prostaglandins, and they are made from the membranes of cells. So these are made from arachidonic acid, which is pulled from cell membranes. So there's a family of prostaglandins, and in seminal fluid, there's a dramatically high amount of prostaglandin E2. Actually, there's 100,000 times the amount of this type of prostaglandin in seminal fluid relative to other tissues in the body that are naturally have high amounts of this prostaglandin. Now, tissues in our body that naturally have high amounts of prostaglandin E2 are tissues with acute inflammation. But nevertheless, this prostaglandin E2 is 100,000 times more concentrated in seminal fluid than the tissues in our body where you find it the most. That's why I made a special note here, about this chemical, because it's just so abundant in seminal fluid. And I'm going to go over in another video why that may be. Okay, so other immune chemicals. We have a whole series of these small glycoprotein cell messengers, these immune chemical messengers. Now, these are not full proteins. These are small polypeptide proteins that have sugars attached to them, that have carbohydrates. So these are glycoproteins, part carbohydrate, part protein, and they're very small. And these are small messengers that work for cell-to-cell communication. Now, these are a family of cytokines and interleukins. So we have interleukin 1b, interleukin 6, interleukin 8, interleukin 10, interleukin 12, an interferon, and then we have another small glycoprotein messenger here, and tumor necrosis factor, which is also an immune chemical. So we have a lot of immune chemicals in seminal fluid that I was surprised to see, but I will go over again in another video why that is. And we also have immune cells in seminal fluid as well. So it's not a far stretch to expect, a certain amount of immune chemicals to go with it. Now, seminal fluid overall has a really high osmolarity. Now, when I mean osmolarity, I mean that it's a very concentrated solution. So when you see this hard bracket around a word or a chemical, that means concentration. So the concentration of seminal fluid, which basically means number of particles, number of solutes per volume, is much higher than that of blood, which means that there's a lot of stuff in seminal fluid that's far higher than blood. So it's more concentrated. Also, seminal fluid overall has a pH of 8, which is relatively basic. It's actually pretty basic. I went over that in my previous video, and which means it has a relatively high number of electrons to share, if you will. So it's a basic fluid with a high buffering capacity. So when you hear something that has a high buffering capacity, in this case, you take, again, a cup of semen or a cup of seminal fluid, and you start adding acid to it. Now, the pH starts at 8, and you start adding acid to this seminal fluid, the pH isn't going to change. It's going to stay a pH of 8. That means it has a high buffering capacity. Now, if you take another solution that just has a pH of 8, it has no buffering capacity, and you put a cup of it down, and then you start adding an acid. As soon as you start adding acid to a fluid without a buffering capacity, the pH is going to immediately start dropping. So anyways, a high buffering capacity means that seminal fluid has the ability to retain its pH even under acidic conditions like the vagina. And that's primarily due because of citrate. Now, citrate is really high in seminal fluid, and it has a massive buffering capacity. So I'm going to put all the references I have in the description box, and I'm going to elaborate on some of these chemicals in future videos. But takeaway message for the viewer for this video series is that I believe seminal fluid has more than just the role for the individual than to help, than to help get people pregnant. to help, procreation. There's more to seminal fluid than just procreation. When all these, chemicals start getting reabsorbed into the body, then it can have a very beneficial effect for the individual.